We recently saw how much more intense neurodivergent oppression is for Black autistic people in the murder of Jordan Neely in New York City. Jordan's life and his murder show the very worst ways the state treats disabled people who suffer other forms of oppression.
Whoa.
He was an autistic person who was hungry, a Black autistic person who was hungry and having a mental health crisis.
He is making the argument that capitalism murdered Jordan Neely because it just couldn't deal with Jordan Neely's neurodivergence. Bro, let's listen again.
By the state and ostracized by ableist stereotypes for their different ways of interacting with the world. We recently saw how much more intense neurodivergent oppression is for Black autistic people in the murder of Jordan Neely in New York City. Jordan's life and his murder show the very worst ways the state treats disabled people who suffer other forms of oppression. He was an autistic person who was hungry, a Black autistic person who was hungry and having a mental health crisis, yelling about his hunger on the subway, which is disruptive in the eyes of capitalism, but not harmful to anyone.
See?
And much of why Jordan was hungry and yelling ties into the ways that his disabilities were exacerbated by the violence and trauma capitalism imposed on him. He was someone whose mother was killed in a femicide during his childhood and who grew up in foster care. Jordan Neely was an autistic person who needed help, but ableism put forward by capitalism teaches people to see those experiencing mental health crises in public as a problem or a threat. And racism makes Black disabled people out to be even more dangerous. In this context, Daniel Penny, an ex-Marine, saw Neely as a threat because he wasn't acting normal and choked him to death. And for days, the city, led by Democrats, but also in particular Democrat mayor and former cop Eric Adams, allowed Penny, Neely's murderer, to walk around, essentially deputizing his actions. And as an autistic person, I'm terrified around police, members of the military, and people who have received training by institutions of state repression because of cases like Jordan Neely's murder. And Black and brown members of the autistic community have all the more reason to be afraid because they are all the more likely to be targeted and harassed and murdered by the state. As revolutionary socialists, it's important that we're fighting all forms of oppression from autistic people like me who are fairly safe and supported, but are devalued and disadvantaged at work and subjected still to.
And as a reminder, all forms of oppression, they believe, come from capitalism, which is defined as private property ownership. That's why they want to abolish it and institute equity. They believe a society built on equity, which is code word for Marxism, will eliminate all forms of oppression. Does everyone understand that? Let me know if you have questions in the chat.
Stereotypes to autistic people like Jordan Neely, who were left especially destitute under capitalism and punished by racist state violence for it. And we should include this to be internationally supportive of the neurodivergent community, which includes all those who have become disabled through imperialism and war.